Well, this was a very popular subject in the newsletter this week. It's how to retain some privacy online, clearing your browser history, wiping away your online footprint. I think it's important to do, so we're going to go through it right now. This is, well, I guess it's kind of funny. It's not funny at the same time. But there are a lot of things that I teach in my courses. There's a lot of simple things that you can do yourself. Of course, we do tons of stuff for our clients, but they're paying us for our time. In fact, they're subsidizing me here now. There's no question about that. But I want to get the information out. And my wife and I have been talking about it for a very long time. So Karen said, hey, why don't we start putting some of this stuff into your newsletter, start putting it onto the website as well. The stuff being, here are the simple things you can do in like about 5 minutes that are going to help. So, of course, what did I say? Well, if you want to do that, go ahead and do that, and I'll review it, and I will make updates to it. So you kind of have to do it. You need to take this bull by the horns. And that's what she's done. So this week was the first week I've done this in a long time. But we put it into the newsletter calling it Craig's Featured Tip. And this week, it's a step-by-step guide to clearing your browser history and wipe away your online footprint, which is an important thing to do for a lot of reasons. Now, I know I talk to people that say this all of the time before I kind of explain things, but they say, well, I have nothing to hide. Why would I worry? Well, of course you have stuff to hide. You don't want those bad guys that are out there phishing you to be able to get a leg up on you. So phishing, of course, as you probably already know, is where the bad guys will send you an email pretending to be the bank, pretending to be a friend, right? It goes on and on. But pretend is kind of the operative word there. And how do they know anything about you? Well, they know because they've stolen information, and that's why you should be checking haveibeenpwned.com. Sign up for their free service. I think it's fantastic what they're doing. And you should be clearing some of this stuff from your browser history. Because when you go to a website, what ends up happening is they set a cookie. And that cookie does a few different things. And this is kind of the interesting part, right? Don't zone out here on me. But the idea for cookies came about because websites are what are called stateless. So in other words, you ask for a web page and ta-da, there's the web page. But the website itself really doesn't know anything about you. You don't have a constant stream of information. So if you go from the home page to the shopping page, and then from there you go to the page about, shoes, let's say, and now you are, 3 pages deep into the website. But the website still doesn't know. Well, how about if you buy a pair of shoes? What's going to happen? Well, it's going to go into your cart. Well, how does it keep track of the cart? How does it know that when you hit the little go back on that screen or the breadcrumb trail that's up there on the top? How does it know what it is that you have been doing so that it can show you what you put into your can, right? Into your shopping cart. How does it know anything about you? Well, it only knows something about you because of the cookies. So it sets this little cookie, which is a unique identifier. So now when you go to that website, just you go to the home page, it sets a little cookie. So it says, okay, this is session number blah, blah, blah. And then you go to the shopping page. So it'll ask the server, hey, what's your cookie session ID? And your web browser will tell them my session ID is thus. And there can be a little bit of data as well that it keeps, but typically it's not really much of a database. And then you go from there to the shoes page, and then you click on something, right? And it's all based around that session ID. That's why that came to being. Otherwise, you would end up having very, very complicated URLs. And of course, like anything else, we actually have both now. It kind of depends on the website that you're at. But here's where things kind of started going downhill, and that is when the marketers, well, they're the first ones that really did this, saw, oh, wait a minute now, there is a unique session ID. And in fact, I can store in that cookie or in another cookie some information about you. So last time you were here, you had this session ID. Well, who are you? And so it'll look it up using your cookie, and it will have some sort of unique identifier that they can then use to track you over multiple sessions. It's kind of like when you walk into a big retailer out there and you connect to their Wi-Fi, or nowadays you don't even have to connect to it, but it sees your MAC address, it sees your hardware's unique serial number, and now it knows, hey, wait a minute, she's been here before, and here's where she went, and here's what she did, here's what she bought. So there's a lot that can be done there. And the marketers are now moving on. Well, they've got the next level, don't they? There's always one more level. And this next level isn't just, oh, okay, I'm keeping a database on that person. But how about if I check and see if there were cookies that were set by some other website out there? You know, where might it be? They were at Zappos.com. And I'm Skechers.com. So you're on Skechers' website and it says, okay, any cookies here? Zappos cookies? I'm looking for this cookie. And the browser would come back and say, yeah, here it is, right? Or Allbirds. I never tried those shoes. Supposed to be the world's most comfortable shoes, they say. It can find out about you and where you have been online. And in many cases, even what you looked at when you were online, or even what you bought while you've been online. And not even necessarily today. It can track it over a longer period of time. So that was the next evolution, which was a problem, obviously, because you don't want all that tracking going on. Well, now you also have the bad guys using this sort of information in order to generate some phishing stuff for you on the website. So you're visiting a site that's been compromised. You don't know it, right? But it's been compromised. And it starts pulling up all kinds of information about you based on your browser and the cookies that are set in it. Now, Google's said, okay, well, we're going to do away with those types of tracking cookies, which is what they're called, and we are going to have just a general categorization. So we're not tracking you, not tracking Craig Peterson. No, heaven forbid. We're just going to set an identifier for you. So for me, it might be something that says, I'm a young guy. And I like this, that, and the other thing, right? So they're going to put us all into a bucket. Maybe the bucket has 1,000 people in it. But that's really all they want and all they need in order to sell ads to advertisers to direct at you, right? So they don't really need to track you, but they do need to put you into a bucket. So that's how Google is solving this. Well, my article this week is really, I think it's pretty good because it explains some of this stuff about clearing your browser's footprint and why it is essential. So I got 5 reasons right there why it's essential. Some steps you can follow if you want to clear your browser footprint. And again, another 5 here. And then the risks of third-party cookies. That's what I was just talking about, where they look up to see if Zappos was a recent visit of yours. And again, a bunch of points. And then how to clear your browser history to keep your risks lower. So this is the part that Karen put together, which is really quite good. So she goes into Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge. So all of the major browsers, and tells you exactly what to do. Click on the 3 dots in the upper right, then do this and do that. And I also in here go into what the potential consequences are of doing some of these things. So if you do clear cookies, some of your automatic logins are not going to work. So you got to keep some of this stuff in mind. right? You want to have to re-log into that website. Well, maybe you should be re-logging in. Maybe you shouldn't let those cookies stay. And maybe you should not be using the autofill on your web browser for usernames and passwords on websites, because that brings up additional problems. So a whole bunch of stuff. You'll find it on my homepage. I got to really fix up my website a little better. But right there. So I want to also point out one other thing. I've talked about some of these AIs, and I call them AIs because that's what everybody calls them. It's like the term hacker. Hacker was never a bad term. It was just somebody that was hacking at software, right? Most computer programmers were hackers. Anyways, AIs. So on that article, you'll notice the graphic at the top. It's a young lady in front of a computer. That graphic I was able to generate using Dolly, which is artificial intelligence graphic generator from our friends over at OpenAI. So check that out as well. Let me know what you think. Just email me, me@craigpeterson.com. I think, they did a very good job, this AI. Yeah, doesn't have enough fingers, but it's just a drawing. I'm not too fussy. We've come a very long way. All right, craigpeterson.com/subscribe if you're not a subscriber already. Most of us go to a niece, a nephew, son, daughter, whoever it might be, in order to figure out how do I make this work? Well, there's another study out right now that shows maybe you shouldn't be trusting Gen Z for cybersecurity. Okay, I'm about to lump everybody together that's in the Generation Z, right? It's like that saying, there's only two types of people. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's one type that divides people into two types and another type that doesn't, right? So that's probably the only generalization that's actually true. So, take this with a grain of salt, or maybe a little bit more. But the problem that we're seeing right now with Generation Z when it comes to cybersecurity is they are the most tech-savvy generation. That's why you go to them, right, to get help with things. But they're also the least experienced in cybersecurity. And frankly, it's experience that matters the most. Experience is absolutely huge, because you have to look at something and realize what the potential consequences are. And how do you do that, right? What's the best way to learn? Well, to fail, right? The best way, I don't know, but it certainly makes sure that you learn. And so if you've been through enough failures, you may well stand a chance of not having that same failure again in the future. And that's where the problems start. Generation Z is also more likely to take risks online. They'll click on suspicious links. They'll download unknown files. They're less likely to use good passwords or two-factor authentication. And they may be aware that their actions have some of these potential negative consequences, such as identity theft or data breaches, but in many cases, they're not. And in many cases, they've kind of given up. I have a son, for instance. You know what I do for a living, right? I do and have now for over 30 years myself been involved in various aspects of internet cybersecurity. Very long time. So I've seen it all pretty much. So you would expect my kids to be conscious, really conscious of cybersecurity issues. Well, one of my sons, who is actually my youngest, is not a Gen Z. He's right on the cusp there, almost is a Gen Z. He's typically classified as millennial. Gen Z is typically those who were born between 1997 and 2010. Okay, that's the bottom line. He's not safe at all. He will do anything he thinks it's crazy to do to take an extra step or two to make sure you're safe online. Like he just hates the idea of having to use a password manager. He hates the idea of two-factor authentication. It just slows him down too much. And I just don't get it, because you can have everything stolen. But then on the other hand, who hasn't had their stuff stolen? Not even necessarily from them, but from these third parties. Look at what's happened. Look at what has happened with the massive credit bureaus, one in particular that comes to mind, and how they have all of this personal information on you and how that information has gone on to be stolen. Well, this survey that I had just conducted down in Australia is showing that 2/3 of small business owners mistakenly believe that tech savviness equates to cyber safety skills. Absolutely not true. So unfortunately, it found that the Gen Zs are among the least safe in the country and are more likely to rate cybersecurity as a low or medium threat. And on top of that, they're struggling more than other groups to identify and prevent some of the most common cyber attacks that small businesses face, like identity theft, malware attacks, ransomware. On the other hand, the survey found that the Gen Xers and upper millennials are the most likely group to take cybersecurity seriously. This is all in the article that was in the newsletter this week that I wrote and posted. This one I did myself. Karen didn't help with this one. Okay. So what are the best qualifications for an employee or somebody else who's handling your cybersecurity? Well, I think the best indicator is someone with experience. Of course, you look at me and say, well, Craig, you got a lot of experience, so you are biased. Well, yeah, I probably am. Because every time, remember I said I've been doing this for 30 years? Every time that we have gone into a business, and in that business we have tried to clean things up, every time there have been glaring, massive cybersecurity problems. I mean, massive. We've got another new client here that we picked up, and you know already that I don't take too many new clients, right? But we picked them up. Great guy, listener to the show for years, reads my newsletter religiously, clicks through on the links, and really tries to understand this stuff. And the company that was doing his cybersecurity, right? It's not him. He hired a third-party outside company. They just completely messed everything up. I mean, really, really, really badly. So he ended up getting hacked, and they said, okay, well, we're going to tighten it up. We need this $10,000 piece of hardware, and it's going to solve your problems. And of course, they didn't do anything right. He's got this hardware. He's got some decent hardware, but it's not configured right. It's not set up right. It's not going to protect him. And he's in a business where there are regulations, and if they get nailed, he could lose that business, and that business is his retirement, right? It just goes on and on. It's absolutely crazy. So the best qualifications, real world experience is the most valuable. That's hands-on experience, handling real world security incidents, performing security tasks is way more valuable than theoretical knowledge that you get through education. Number 2, the education is probably not up to date. School teaches you how to learn, college, university, but when we're talking about cybersecurity, the stuff is changing on a weekly, daily, sometimes basis, okay? It's constantly evolving. And the information and techniques that are taught in schools and a lot of these certifications are quickly outdated. Experience also gives you a broader range of skills. So, for instance, when I'm going in there to this new client, they've got a guest Wi-Fi posted up on the wall. Here you go. Here's the password. Get on the guest Wi-Fi. Well, the companies that had been in before us set this up so that it was a completely flat network. you could get onto the guest Wi-Fi and access every machine in every office that my client has, because it was all tied together with no blocks, no firewalls, no VLANs. It's incredible, right? But when you've got this broader range of skills, you go in and say, I've seen problems with this before. Let's have a little bit of a deeper look. And that deeper look showed exactly what I just described to you. So a combination of education, experience, you've got to be continuing your education, you've got to be staying on top of it. And I know a lot of people who are on the email list, the weekly list, and use it as their education. So I've got a bunch more stuff in there, more key points. You'll find it, of course, in this week's newsletter and on my website. So just go to CraigPeterson.com/subscribe if you haven't subscribed, or if you thought you subscribed but you haven't seen my newsletter this week, right there, CraigPeterson.com/subscribe. And if you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I do a little free consulting every week. I set aside a few hours, and maybe you should be a case study. Me at CraigPeterson.com. Well, the tech layoffs have hit a lot of people, but I want to look at the real numbers, and I also want to look at something I've been paying attention to really for quite a few years, and that's the whole H-1B visa program, the foreign workers we have. When you get right down to the numbers, there have been a lot of people laid off. Already this year, we're looking at over 78,000 tech industry workers who've lost their job. 2022, there were about 160,000 that lost their jobs, according to layoffs.fyi. But these layoffs, are hard on individuals, but the numbers really aren't enough yet to put a dent in the massive job market in the tech business. And as a whole, the U.S. tech industry, which does include these big tech companies like Google and Apple and all of these others that have been laying off, the tech industry added employees for the 25th consecutive month in December. And that's according to CompTIA, which is a trade industry. The number of people who are working in tech occupations, now that means we're talking about computer-related technical jobs like software developers, network engineers, data analysts, was at a record high of about 6.5 million people, and their unemployment rate was near a record low of 1.8%. Compared to, depends what numbers you believe, but maybe 3.5%. So it's certainly possible those numbers have shifted over the last couple of months, but tens of thousands of layoffs won't move the needle that much when we're talking about percentage. 59% of people, by the way, who have tech jobs don't actually work in the tech industry like I think most of us think. Now, this is according again to some stats from CompTIA. The number of people in percentage that have worked, percentage that have worked in the tech industries for the last decade has stayed about the same, because even as finance, healthcare, retail companies started requiring more tech talent to help them, move on to these new digital platforms, the little iPads and things they use for checkouts, and automating businesses, the tech industry, especially software development, grew too. So that kept the percentages about the same. So it's really interesting to look at all of those numbers. Google's layoffs in California included 30 in-house massage therapists. Yeah. It included chefs, some of these chefs, Michelin star chefs that worked at the headquarters. So that doesn't really bode well when you talk about tech workers. Yeah, they're working for a tech company, but many of these people were not high tech. They weren't programmers, etc. There were people in HR, payroll, just all kinds of jobs. So those percentages stay about the same. We're talking the majority of people in the tech business aren't actually programmers or the high tech type of people. So it's interesting to look at all these numbers, isn't it? And certainly it can hurt. But here's the other nice thing. Even though there's been some downsizing, the number of open jobs is pretty high. Now, where I get kind of depressed about the open jobs is that these businesses that are hiring, the bigger ones, not so much the small ones, unless they're using one of these hiring websites, they're all using AI. AI, of course, being a form of machine learning, where you have a computer program that looks through the resumes, looks at the job posting and says, okay, this person matches. Yes, they have 5 years, they have this degree, they've done that, they've done this, ta-da, you're in. But what we've been finding is that these automated systems, and you can use them, you've heard them advertised on the radio and elsewhere before, these systems are not good at picking people who would be good in a field, but maybe don't match all of the courses or some of the certifications that they want. And unfortunately, many of us business owners, as well as hiring people, have relied very, very heavily on those. That's a real problem because of the amount of focus that really has been put onto these automated systems to find people. We find a great match within 24 hours. Yeah, well, that's an automated system. How about all of the other people that would have done a very, very good job in that position, but were completely overlooked because the computer did not see the advantage of it? Do you see where I'm going with that? So we've lost a lot of jobs from a lot of people working in the U.S., in the tech industry primarily is what we've been talking about. But we've seen more jobs created in the tech industry than we've lost. So some of those numbers, I think, are kind of the fear porn angle, right? Where they're saying, hey, listen, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Isn't that kind of the bottom line? Siri's jumping in with the fear porn. But overall, you can find jobs. So that's really an interesting way to look at it, I thought. And it's a great article here that I'm looking at from Fortune magazine that was published right at the beginning of February. But they're talking about what can you do, the 12,000 employee cut at Google in late January, and what does that mean to all of us? And ultimately, the talent is going. Now, where are they going? Well, it's turned out that many of these people are going to new careers entirely. They've fed up with high tech. Many of them are starting new businesses, which is a good thing, but it can take a long time to get to where you want to be. And frankly, if you've been working for somebody for years, you may not want to jump that ship too quickly. Be very, very careful. But, it's sitting out there. It's something I've done for many, many decades I've been out on my own, and I've had employees, and I work with my family now primarily, but I think it's a good thing. So I put an article up this week. It's an update of an older article that I had about the H-1B visas. And the H-1B visa is what is used by companies to bring foreign workers in. I had a couple of people who were working on H-1B visas for me back in the day. I think they were both actually from India. And I was kind of disappointed in some ways and not in others. So I paid them the same wage that I would pay an American, although many companies do not do that, including a couple of these big consulting firms that are actually based in India. We could talk about that one for a very long time and how it has hurt my business greatly because of some of the cheating some of these companies, these consulting firms have been doing. But the idea is you have an H-1B visa when you need employees that have certain abilities that you haven't been able to find in the U.S. So you run ads online, you used to be in newspapers, and then you have to submit all of that paperwork saying, hey, I can't find anybody. Here's someone overseas. I want to bring him in. And you do. But what's been happening is a lot of these businesses, like these consulting firms I made reference to, don't pay the H-1B workers fairly. It's in some ways it's slave labor. And many of these people, even in the high-tech business with H-1B visas, are multiple people in a small apartment that they're living in, paid really, really low wages, which again is against the regulations and against the laws. And they're just doing it. So now that we've got these tech layoffs, these people are also suffering. But you know what? It's harder for them to jump jobs because they have to be sponsored in order to stay in the U.S. As I've been saying for a long time, it's time to revamp the H-1B visa program. And high-tech, it's taking care of me and my family quite well over the years. Stick around. When electric vehicles and smart chargers are plugged into our critical infrastructure, what could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out plenty. Great article in the newsletter this week from Dark Reading about EVs. We have talked about electric vehicles so much here over the years and some of the serious problems that exist with electric vehicles. And of course, it's kind of everything, right? From they sure as heck are not green. They may not have anything coming out of their tailpipes, but the manufacturing of the vehicles, including the batteries and all of the mining and the overburden and the shipping and everything else that goes into these makes them definitely not a great value for the environment, right? It's you've really got two different types of people here that are kind of fighting for it and against it. And it was amazing to me to hear about a problem that's been happening off the coast of New Jersey. And this problem is humpback whales turning up dead on the seashore. The seashore, I know I can say it. And there's debates about exactly why. But the interesting part to me is that you have two ultra left-wing groups who are now fighting with each other. You've got these crazy people on the environmentalist side, right? And then you've got the wacko global warming / climate change people. So the climate change people are saying we've got to stop spending money on cars and getting all of this fuel, diesel, gasoline, our home heating oil. We got to get rid of all of it, and we got to move over to solar and wind. And now you've got the greenies on the other side saying, well, wait a minute now, your wind farms off the coast are killing the whales. Interesting, isn't it? Of course, neither side listens to any other side, so I don't think they're going to get very far, right? There's no room for reasoned discussion here about any of that stuff. Obviously, they haven't even discussed really all of the hundreds of thousands of birds that are killed every year, including some endangered species by these wonderful windmills. There's no logic to any of this. We've talked about that 100 million times. So we now have another problem that's come to light. And that is these electric vehicles need to be charged. Right? That's putting everything else aside. All of the pollution from them, the fact that a Tesla at 150,000 miles could be costing you $10,000 a year in maintenance, like it is. Some people out there have seen some articles that they've posted about it. and you have to replace your batteries. Well, you might as well just buy a brand new Tesla, throw it away. And one guy went ahead and basically did that. He lit it afire because it just cost more than the car was worth to change the batteries, and he needed new batteries, right? There's so many problems with electric cars, and yet the federal government keeps pushing them. So now we got power creation problems, like I mentioned, in New Jersey, killing humpback whales potentially. And we also have distribution problems. California doesn't have enough electricity for electric cars they already have, and they're asking people to garage them. And you get a cold snap, and it's, hey, yeah, you can't charge your cars because we need electricity to heat the homes. And then you get a hot snap. Yeah, you can't charge your cars because we need electricity to run the air conditioning. Right, it goes on and on. Now it's turned out that the electric vehicle charging infrastructure is also a problem. Now, this is a really interesting problem because we've got electric cars on the road, we've got plug-in hybrids, and the nation's electric grid can't handle it, right? Because we're doing stupid things like depending on the sun being out 24 hours a day and the wind blowing 24/7, right? If you want safe, if you want green, you go with the new nuclear. There's no question about that. Intrinsically, inherently safe, using basic physics to make sure that it's safe, right? It's not like the old power plants. And some states and countries are even now turning their old power plants or old nuclear ones back online. Even the governor of California, Newsom, he went ahead and extended the lifetime of at least one nuclear plant out there in California that was supposed to be shut down. Because guess what? They need electricity, whether or not they have these stupid electric cars. So our 70-year-old behemoth of a U.S. electric grid is having some problems. We've got about 600,000 new electric vehicles on the road. And they're hooked up to what when they're being charged? They're hooked up to our critical national infrastructure, right? That's something that I ran some webinars for the FBI InfraGuard program about, that critical infrastructure. So what can you do? What should you do? What could possibly go wrong here? Well, as it turns out, quite a few things. First of all, these chargers that are out there, last numbers I saw, about 30% of them don't work. Period. They don't work. They're busted. They're broke. And then if you have an electric car, you may be able to bring around with you in your car some adapters to make sure it can get charged. If you're off the main roads, you may not be able to get a charge because there aren't enough electric chargers around. It would be really nice. You pull into the hotel at night, you charge your car up. Well, again, can it charge it in time if it even has the right kind of chargers? And now, moving on to the next level, those chargers are smart, which means they've got a computer in them, at least one. And that smart charger is now going to take your account information, maybe from your credit card. Maybe you have an account with the company that's running the chargers, right? You got a Tesla. You bought it really early, so you still expect free electricity. All of that is being run on the computer right there. And those computers are now getting hacked. Think about the car again for a minute. We just talked a few weeks ago about all 16 major brands having serious cybersecurity problems with their APIs or application programming interfaces. Serious problems. Problems so that programming interface can be used to hack your cars. So you're plugging that car into a computer. that may or may not be able to hack your car, okay? You're putting private personal information, including financial information, which, of course, could be stolen by the bad guys because you're putting it into the computer. It's relying on the internet to get that information back and forth. And of course, the internet can certainly go down. And it's already been found that some of these charging stations are actually being used as jump points by the bad guys to hack other computers and to do denial of service attacks. In fact, there have been denial of service attacks on the charging stations. Imagine that. Imagine our military with electric vehicles. I know it's an important thing, right? Because the Obama administration's really put a lot of effort into that. Not just the yellow school buses being electric, but military vehicles. Yeah. A denial of service attack means that you are bringing that computer that you're targeting or multiple computers to their knees. So some of these charging stations have been knocked offline. What happens is there's more and more of them, right? The electric grid is built to give electricity. There are a few points on the grid that are feeding the grid. Now, there's a couple of grids. Texas has its own. There's a Northeast grid, right? There's more than that. Well, the current grid, it has about 9,200 generating units, 600,000 miles of transmission lines, more than 1 million megawatts of generating capacity, and it was built when the current electrical needs of a household were a few light bulbs and a toaster back in the 1960s. Now, I want you to think about your average night at home. Your kids are home. Right? The kids are using their computers, their smartphones, their tablets. There are TVs in every room now. You're running a load of wash. The lights are still on because nobody turned them off, and I've got to go around and turn them off, right? That's every dad's job. And the bathroom lights, etc. Someone's playing video games. They got speakers going. You've got people streaming Netflix, Apple TV, etc. Microwave is running. Little kids are talking to Alexa. I had a toddler today. We were babysitting grandkids, and he asked Alexa to play this particular song for him. And you're charging your electric car. Now add 26 million more Teslas and you can start to see the problem. Plus, the electric grid, of course, is supposed to distribute the electricity, not receive it. So when you start putting all of these little generators like wind turbines, solar panels, and in some cases these electric vehicles that also have petroleum-based engines, we're forcing this 1960s grid far beyond its intended use. And some people, of course, suggesting, well, why don't we go to a smart grid? Because, of course, smart makes everything better, right? Smart. Whatever that means. And the idea behind it is it can give and receive power. The capacity will be much larger than we have now. Large loads like these electric vehicle charging stations, heating, cooling systems can crash the grid, and we have seen it. Remember Texas winter? I think it was 2021. They almost got to the point where they would have been without electricity for, in some people, as much as 6 months. Because of what? Because the smart grid ain't so smart, because it doesn't exist. I wish people, politicians, would consider reality rather than just power and authority. CraigPeterson.com. I've been more than a little upset with Apple lately, and we're going to talk about them. What's up? You know, I've recommended Apple because of the hardware and software, but man, lately, I don't know. So that's what we're going to talk about. Apple used to be kind of a toy operating system on its Macs. In fact, if you watch some of the videos, you've been on one of my calls, one of my trainings, etc., you might have noticed in the background that I have an original Mac, one of those cute little things. It actually still works. It still runs. And they were good, okay, but they had their limitations, that's for sure. The same thing is true, in fact, even more so, by many opinions, mine included, the same thing is true of Windows, how it was just a complete toy, right? It ran on top of DOS. You could invoke it, and then off it went, and then they came out, right? All of those other Windows versions, XP and on, just toys, absolute toys. There was no real operating system. When I say operating system, let me define it. An operating system, besides being able to run software, it provides a good interface to the hardware so that the programmers don't have to worry about accessing the hardware, which Windows has never done until recently. And it also protects programs from each other. And then arguably, the operating system allows you to have multiple users. So where does that all fall in? Well, Apple, of course, has done that more recently since 2001, and Windows is doing that. They've got their server editions, and they're kind of picking up where Unix left off in the 70s, right? Even HP, I remember running HP Access 2000F, some pretty darn cool computers back in the day, and getting on those with the teletype and using them. Those were real operating systems. IBM's operating systems, the 370 OS was just phenomenal. We were running VM CMS, and this was in the mid-70s. And it allowed multiple users. So that technology has been around for a long time, and it just kind of upsets me when you get Microsoft out there talking about how, they're the first, they developed this, it's their idea. No, it's not. It's been in the business for 40 years. Even the whole concept of virtual machines, right? Or I should say, Microsoft has recently added that in. Oh, isn't this cool? We can run virtual machines now. It's just, it's a first, industry first. Well, no, it's not. Unix has been doing that for almost ever. IBM's been doing that since, early 70s when they started really messing around with that. So, come on, guys, get your act together. But we're talking about Apple here. I switched to using Apple probably, I think it was around 2002, because in 2001, Apple came out with what they called OS X. The last release of their operating system for the old Macs was OS IX, which again was a bit of a toy, kind of like Microsoft's operating systems of the day. And then when they came out with OS X, they made a huge shift. They switched over to a Unix underbelly. FreeBSD, macOS, just absolutely incredible stuff. And that made them now a real player out there in the operating system business. It made the potential here, at least it provided them with the potential of being far more secure than Windows of its day could ever be. Because again, Windows applications, they write directly to some of the devices, right? Oh, I'm going to the GPU. I'm going to paint this on the screen for the user. So much faster than using the operating system primitives. And yeah, that's what we're going to do. Which, of course, makes your computer much less secure. I'm just totally geeking out here, so I have to kind of apologize. I had a great geek out session with a listener, Doug, earlier this week, and it was kind of fun. So I've been a little, sentimental, I guess, over the last week or two. So looking at Apple now, it has a real operating system underneath it. We could talk about all of the stuff that happened with Microsoft and bringing Cutler in, and I worked on NT 1.0 back in the day, in the operating system, that is. And there's a lot of stuff that Apple has done that just doesn't compare, thank goodness, to what Windows has done. So why am I really upset with Apple right now? Because I still recommend it. You should still be using a Mac. You should still be using an iPhone or a tablet, right, an iPad from Apple. You should never, ever be using any of the Android devices for so many reasons we've covered so many times here on the show. It's just not worthwhile because of the security side and privacy. But here's what's happened. Apple has been using this company in China for manufacturing, particularly of their iPhones, right? And there is a company over in China called Foxconn. You might have heard of that, Foxconn. It is an absolutely huge company, frankly. Taiwanese multinational. They are electronics contract manufacturer, and that is what they do. Well, Foxconn is making a lot of products for a lot of companies, including Apple. But they've done some things that are problematic, and this is where Apple comes in. Foxconn has the world's largest iPhone factory, and they have had some kind of riots lately. Think of, the old Tiananmen Square thing from some years ago where the guy was standing there and his brother was there too. But remember the guy standing there with the bags blocking the tanks from coming in. That sort of thing has happened again, including the tanks, although it's not making it onto the news so much. Man, the Chinese censors have been very busy to try and keep that out of the news. But we have been seeing some of the rioting, some of the people on strike, the demonstrations. Some areas of China have relieved themselves of this zero COVID idiocy that they've been practicing for a while. And it's at the point now where the Chinese people, some of them have just been pushing back. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, most likely, right? China, again, tries to keep a tight lid on it. And so they've relieved or removed some of these zero COVIDs in some areas because of the demonstrations. But looking at Foxconn again, think of a small campus, mostly high-rise buildings, that has 20,000 people living there. That's the size of a nice town, right? A larger town. And those people live there and work there. It reminds me of, you remember the old song, I Owe My Soul to the Company Store, right? Who wrote that song? I got to look it up here because it's going to drive me crazy. Oh, yeah, Tennessee Ernie Ford, of course. So that's what's happening here. They live there, they sleep there, they watch movies there, they eat their meals there, and they work there. So they just go from floor to floor as the day goes on. Well, of that 20,000 people, it turns out that there are quite a number of Uyghurs who are there. A number of different ways to pronounce that. I'm sure I'm doing it wrong. But these are people who are under forced labor conditions. So the Chinese government has instituted slavery, although they deny it. And Foxconn is using some of those slaves, literal slaves. In this case, it's a Muslim minority that's from northwest China, more or less. Foxconn's using those people, and we are, benefiting by that. Foxconn certainly is. But if you don't have to pay somebody, if you're just feeding them and housing them, that's going to save you a whole lot of money, isn't it, in the manufacturing? Now, I am not one of those who says, we should be paying them the same wages we should be paying people in the U.S., because it takes a while for them to come up to U.S. standards, right? For the manufacturing to come up to U.S. standards, etc. But in the case of China now, they have surpassed us. I saw some photos of some of the tiny miniature screws that are used in the latest iPhone. And they compared those screws to some precision screws, the same size, same thread, made here in the US. And the article was arguing that in reality, we cannot compete with China here. We cannot make, first of all, the same quality of screws that are coming out of these Chinese factories and going into our devices, not just Apple's, but everybody's. So we can't make the same quality. It showed a very close-up, microscopic look at those different screws, the one from China that's made and used by Apple there, and the ones that are made here in the U.S. And it's the ones from China are just beautiful. The edges are just, everything's cut perfectly. There's no nastiness on it. And the one made in the U.S. is not very good. It doesn't even have the beveled head that the Chinese one does. But, we could improve. But the biggest problem is the volume. We cannot make the volume of those screws just to make iPhones. And think about everything, right? I'm picking on Apple right now. But everything made by all of these companies. So what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? You might remember President Trump back in 2019 came out and said, hey, listen, we're opening an Apple production facility in Austin, Texas, which is true. They were taking over another factory. They're going to make Mac Pros there. So I'm going to talk about Apple's decision now and other companies about manufacturing in the U.S., not just assembling, but manufacturing. We talked about the screw problem. Well, there's actually a whole lot more. Make sure you get my newsletter. This is in the newsletter, craigpeterson.com/subscribe. There are monetary, social, political, duty, tariff, reputational risks, your intellectual property risks that have to do with manufacturing in China. So we're going to talk about what Apple is up to right now. There are many companies now that are looking to move out of China. Those days are over. Now, I want to talk about something here from an economic standpoint as well. We are manufacturing in China because the quality is good and the price is cheap, which is part of the problem with the slave labor, right? But I am not against going to some place where the price is cheap. And here's why. Some examples here from recent decades. I think the biggest one, and maybe the best one to use, is that of India. Now, you might remember India was cheap, right? We were offshoring all kinds of projects to India. We're still offshoring a lot of tech support stuff and projects, not as much as we used to, because India is outsourcing to China. But even then, before that, we have Japan. And Japan, made in Japan, used to mean it was absolutely cheap, terrible junk that would fall apart immediately upon purchase, right? It was Japan that was sending over shiploads of I love the way this one guy had described it, but, cheap fake vomit that you'd put right in front of the fridge on the floor, right? This rubber vomit and dog poop and all of this other stuff. That was coming from from Japan. Look at Japan today. They've learned, of course, we rebuilt their factories after the war, gave them some real high-tech capabilities, far more so than we had here, but we left them in fantastic shape from that standpoint, and they were able to grow to the point where come mid to late 70s, early 80s, made in Japan started to mean something positive. I remember buying a Toyota because it was a great little car at the time. It was a whole lot of fun. I had a Toyota Cressida with a Supra engine in it. It was, wow, so cool for a 20-something, right? Well, the same thing happened with India. Made in India isn't necessarily as good as made in Japan right now, but it probably will be. And same thing with China. China used to be the cheap place to go, right? Where'd you buy from China? Well, you got those little umbrellas that you put in drinks, right? That back in the day. Now you get quality products out of China. But there are a lot of problems with manufacturing in China. I mentioned those here in the opening. The monetary problems, social, political, duty, tariffs, reputation, your intellectual property potentially being stolen. And all of those have been increasing a lot. Plus now the cost of manufacturing has gone up. So we are in the process of raising the standard of living in China. Of course, the biggest problem is that China is run by socialists. And those socialists want to control every aspect of their lives. It's a typical thing socialist leftists do, right? That's what they're up to. And so the people in that country are not benefiting as much as they could be. Because if you compare, again, the quality of what they're making to the cost, the cost is too low. That iPhone should not cost you $1,000. I saw a really great little breakdown saying, if it was made in the U.S., it'd probably be $1,600 to $2,000. And that's what should be happening in China. Of course, the socialists are stopping that from happening, right? They're keeping people under their thumb, and they're using some slave labor, which is a real problem in my eye. So that's where I've really kind of drawn the line with Apple lately. It's, you guys, you're doing this in China. It's hurting us. It's hurting our reputation. You are making some of this stuff, including chips there in Taiwan, which is very, very dangerous. Big strike, in fact, at Foxconn's workers in Taiwan, the company called Jiangsu, which is a factory. They walked out over a pay dispute with the company. Now, of course, you don't have the amount of socialism in Taiwan that you do over in China. And if you want to look at the fastest growing and most incredible, it's Singapore, which is totally free trade. It's just incredible how that's been growing over there. But this one factory is estimated to account for more than 70% of Apple's global assembly of iPhones. So if your supplier that supplies you with 70% of your products goes out on strike, or the other problem that they've been having in Taiwan is a major water shortage, and you need a lot of water in order to make chips. The chips that are in all of our devices nowadays. The average car has 100 plus chips in it. It's just incredible, little computers. So what should you do? Well, a lot of companies have really started to smarten up. They finally realize, wait a minute now, getting everything from one company may not be the best idea ever. Where did that come from? Well, that actually came from Japan and the whole idea of just-in-time inventory. And I remember studying that and how great it was back in the 70s in college. And man, it's just, they're going to take over the world. China's going to own the whole world. Of course, they've been in a severe economic slump for over 20 years now. But just-in-time inventory is all well and good, and it's kind of cool, a good way to do it when the technology is changing on an almost daily basis, right? You don't want to have a warehouse full of stuff, but you also want to have something that you can sell. You want to be able to have some money, right? If you don't have any income as a business, you don't have a business, and people lose their jobs. A real problem. So Apple now is planning to move out of China. That is huge. Now, China, again, this is not an economics course, but China has been really kind of hurting lately with some of their lack of population growth, because they've been building all of these ghost cities. I just saw a thing where they were blowing up some of these high rises that had been built and never occupied. It just, wow, okay. So what do you think is going to end up happening when we move our stuff out, right? I think what's going to end up happening is that China's going to be hurting even more. It may push them over the edge. But our friends, again, over at Apple have said, no, we are not going to be putting up with that. We are not going to do it. So I think that's pretty darn cool. They're moving on out. So we'll see what happens. Apple really accelerated their plans over the last weeks and months here to shift some of its production outside of China. They are moving it to other places in Asia, particularly India, which, as I mentioned earlier, has really moved ahead in its ability to produce high tech and have just brilliant people there, right? They're now given that opportunity. Also, Vietnam, which has been really progressing, right? It used to be they made some textiles. Now Vietnam and some other of these countries in Indonesia, etc., are making high-tech disk drives and other things. You might remember just a few years ago, we had a big shortage of hard disk drives because there was a big flood that happened down there and they couldn't manufacture. So they are moving manufacturing, Apple and other companies, out of China. And I love to see this. Again, India, it's going to help those people there so much. Vietnam, the same thing. And I really wish we would do more here, but there's good news there too. That Taiwanese company I was talking about, TMC, that makes so many of the chips, they are building the highest tech chip plant in the world right here in the USA. 3 nanometer technology. Wow, this is going to be cool. So finally, the world is waking up and China is getting a black eye. Now, what does that mean? Well, we'll leave it to the politicians, but I'm sure it won't mean good things. Make sure you're on my email list, craigpeterson.com, so you get all of this news as soon as it's available. Well, we've got another warning here for Android users, and this one has to do with VPN apps. Now, are any VPN apps legitimate? We could argue that. We'll talk about that in just a minute, but these ones, they are not. This was in my newsletter from a website called WeLiveSecurity.com. They've got a lot of great articles on there. But I love this headline because it's the truth. Malicious apps used in this active campaign are exfiltrating contacts, SMS messages, recorded phone calls, and even chat messages from apps such as Signal, Viber, and Telegram. Signal is the private messaging app that I recommend. It's free. It's available for pretty much every platform out there, and it is quite secure. Many other companies use Signal as the basis for their communication so that they can have that type of end-to-end security. Telegram, no, not so good. I've never used Viber, never investigated it, so I can't tell you much about Viber. But here's what's going on. There is a group out there called the Bahamut group, and they have been active since January 2022. And they are distributing malicious apps through a fake website. Now, these apps are purported to be VPN apps and are legitimate VPN apps. Again, you probably know what my gripes are with these VPNs that are out there, VPN services, that is, that they're just bad news for so many people, so many ways. Don't use them. But this is a website that pretends to be secure VPN. And they have another one that's pretending to be OpenVPN, which is something that I've used before for point-to-point communications, that is. So these are kind of what you might call side-loaded apps. And man, is there a huge discussion over this one. The European Union, for instance, wants Apple to open up their architecture so people can install apps from any vendor. And Apple makes a lot of money because of its App Store. Vendors on the App Store are paying 20 or 30% of the money that you are paying for an app. Apple's keeping 20 to 30% of that money. Now, okay, they've developed a great ecosystem. They've got a good product, and that's why people are using it. So why shouldn't companies that are selling apps pay something in the form of royalties, really, to Apple? I think they should. But the European Union says, okay, that's fine, but they should not be limited to just Apple. The reason I bring that up is because of this whole concept of sideloading. You see, neither one of those pieces of spyware were distributed via the Google Play Store. Google Play, they weren't available. You got the legitimate ones if you went to the Google Play Store. But because of the fact that people were downloading these apps from the fake websites, a fake soft VPN site and a fake open VPN site, and installing them on their Android device, now all of a sudden they lost all of their, potentially anyways, their contacts, all of their text messages, their recorded phone calls, chat messages, even from secure apps. That's a very, very big deal. So the app is a Trojanized version of either soft VPN or open VPN. They repackaged it with this Bahamut spyware code that they've used in the past. And the investigation showed at least 8 versions of these maliciously patched apps with these code changes and updates that are available through their distribution website. So that means that this campaign is well maintained. And the main purpose of these app modifications is to extract sensitive user data and actively spy on the victim's messaging apps. Isn't that something here? So once the spyware is launched, it requests an activation key before the VPN and spyware functionality can be enabled. So both the activation key and the website link are sent to targeted users. This is why I am not quite on the fence about whether or not Apple should open up its ecosystem to anybody. See, I'm not on the fence. I think people should know, hey guys, if you're not buying it from the Apple Store, you are potentially in for a load of problems. Now, just because you get it on the Apple Store or the Google Play Store does not mean that that app is guaranteed to be safe. No, not at all. Both companies, both Google and Apple, use some programs to scan through the apps that are submitted to try and figure out, is this app legitimate or are they doing something they shouldn't be? And it catches probably the vast majority of all of those, but it doesn't catch all of them. So if you now have the European Union forcing Apple to open up its architecture so that applications can be loaded into the iPhone that are not vetted by Apple, then what? What's going to end up happening? Well, this sort of thing is going to end up happening because people are going to say, oh, why should I pay for that in the App Store? Here, it's free over here. And yet, that is a piece of nasty spyware. Now, both Android and Apple iOS, the iPhone operating system, have some stuff in place to help to wall off the applications from each other so that they can't do as much malicious stuff. But, you know, if applications can't talk to each other or can't share certain data, you're going to lose functionality. So they have to be able to share some things and see some things. Pretty big deal, right? So be very, very careful with this because these guys are masters in phishing. And there's an investigative journalism group called Bellingcat that is, is out there, is trying to do this. So I don't know. Don't use Android, period. If you're going to use Android, only get apps from the Google Play Store because you're going to be safer. And as far as Apple completely opening up, well, I see it on the one side, right? Do you own that phone? Should you be allowed to put whatever software you want on it? Well, yeah. How about the next step? Should you be able to just grab any software from anywhere? And what if it's malicious? Are you going to try and go after Apple? Because it's not Apple's fault that this software is terribly malicious. Okay? There are a lot of problems that are going to have to be addressed. So what Apple has done on their operating system for quite a while now is they have signatures on apps for Mac OS, as well as obviously for iOS. Microsoft has once again followed Apple's lead and also has signed applications. They did it a bit of a different way, but it does help to prove legitimacy, at least where did it come from, which solves that biggest problem, which is who's liable. So if it's a signed application, you can at least figure out who it was ultimately, because someone had to sign up with Google or Apple, and I am signed up as a developer with both of those, and then I have to pay, right? It's $100, give or take, depends who, right? And I pay with a credit card or a debit card, and those cards are traceable ultimately back to me. So we've still got a lot of things to answer for here. Be very, very careful. I'm not a VPN fan. I've got a great little webinar I did on that. But this is particularly bad. Do not sideload apps. Only run apps that are from the official app stores. And if you have a question, you can just email me, me@craigpeterson.com. It's that simple, craigpeterson.com. We've got a bit of information here on telephone spoofing. This is a scam that one of the perpetrators was just caught. They had taken $100 million plus from people. So we're going to talk about how to avoid these phone scams. I've had caller ID for quite a while. You might remember back in the day, what was it? You dialed star 69, was it, to call back the last person that called you? It wasn't telling you who it was who was calling you, but it just let you call them back. It's kind of cool, but that's also kind of old. Nowadays, we have caller ID. You notice how it kind of went downhill with cell phones? Because caller ID on a landline phone used to give the phone number and the name of the person that was calling, right? Or at least the name associated with that phone number. When cell phones came around, it would show you the number that was calling, but wouldn't tell you who it is. There was different caller ID information embedded in that. And if you have that person in your contacts, it'll look up the phone number and show you the name that's in your contacts, which I guess is okay. But there is a lot that can be done to fool you, and it's called spoofing. It's where they are pretending to be someone else. And there is a guy who was just arrested. This is quite an interesting article, again, in the newsletter, craigpeterson.com/subscribe. But they grabbed a domain called ispoof.cc. The government did, the police did, right? And what they had was a service at iSpoof that allowed you to pay via Bitcoin in order to make phone calls with any caller ID that they wanted. How's that for a great way to do it, right? And I've had that ability for a very long time. It is frankly not that difficult. They are cracking down on it, and because of that, they've made my life, my legitimate life, a little bit harder. But, just a few people ruin it for the rest of us, right? So in this case, they did it a little differently. They did seize the domain, but usually what will happen is the domain gets seized. The bad guys notice, wait a minute, our domain got seized, run, and then they go and they start their operation somewhere else, particularly when we're talking about the dark web, because so much of the dark web is so difficult to track down. So they would seize the domain and, get on top of the building and start crowing, look at what a great job the police did. But they didn't catch the bad guys. That's not what happened this time. They did it the right order anyways. So here's what they did. This is from the press release. Judicial and law enforcement authorities in Europe, Australia, the United States, Ukraine, and Canada have taken down a website that allowed fraudsters to impersonate trusted corporations or contacts to access sensitive information from victims, a type of cybercrime known as spoofing. But you guys knew that, right? The website is believed to have caused an estimated worldwide loss in excess of 100 million pounds sterling, which of course is over 100 million US dollars. In a coordinated action led by the United Kingdom and supported by Europol and Eurojust, 142 suspects have been arrested, including the main administrator of the website. Now, this alleged ringleader is a 34-year-old guy by the name of TJ Fletcher. And, of course, he's in custody there by the police. He's going to appear in court, and I'm sure it'll go on and on and on. But the bottom line is you cannot trust what it says on the caller ID. So here's what to do. Some great tips here from Naked Security. Tip 1, treat the caller ID as nothing more than a hint. That is so important, okay? And this is a good way to avoid the scam. Okay, it says it's so-and-so calling. It might be, it might not be. But the caller's number that shows up on your phone before you answer proves nothing, okay? Those caller ID numbers are nothing better than really a vague hint that it might be that person or company. So if the phone rings and the names that are associated with it are your bank's name here, right? Remember that those words that pop up come from your own contact list. So you might have TD Bank, for instance, in your contacts with TD Bank's phone number, and these bad guys could use iSpoof or so many other ways to do it, as I just indicated. And now they're calling with a caller ID of, in this case, we'll say TD Bank, and then TD Bank's number is looked up in your contacts and it says, yeah, it's TD Bank calling. Oh, okay. Well, I better answer it, okay? So be very careful. Just look at it this way, that the caller ID number coming in provides no more proof than the subject line of an email, right? How many times have you opened an email based on the subject line and just said, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're doing that, right? They did that to me again. Tip number 2, always initiate official calls yourself and use a number you can trust. So if you genuinely need to contact an organization like your bank by phone, make sure that you initiate the call and use a number that worked out for you previously, okay? So you might want to look at an official bank statement. You got to be careful. Even, you go to even Google, right, that so many people use, can be poisoned is what it's called. So that Google will show you the wrong information. That happened to my dad. He was looking for Microsoft tech support, and he ended up with some scammers that were downloading his spreadsheet that had all of his passwords in it. Don't do that. Use onepassword.com, okay, everybody? So be careful. Look at the bank statement. Double check everything. I hate to have to say this stuff, right? Because my gosh, these people, there's some really bad people out there. Tip 3, don't let a coincidence convince you the call is genuine, okay? So don't assume the call must be from the bank because you had some problems with the bank, right? The credit card didn't work. You were on the internet this morning. You couldn't log into your bank account. Right? That's a coincidence. That doesn't mean it's legit. So iSpoof scammers made at least 3.5 million calls in the UK alone and 6.5 million elsewhere, including the US, over a 1-year period. So that means the scammers were placing an average of 1 call every 3 seconds at the most likely times a day for people to answer. So coincidences aren't merely possible. Frankly, they're kind of inevitable here, right? They're doing a lot of work because the bottom line is, according to the numbers that were released by the FBI and Interpol, these guys were getting an average of over $10,000 each out of a few thousand people. Isn't that something? Number 4, make sure your friends and family that you think might be vulnerable to some sweet talker or maybe browbeaten, confused, intimidated by scammers know that they can and should turn to you for help. You are the best and brightest. You are likely somebody's tech support, right? Make sure they know they can reach out to you. So in the case of my dad, where he thought he was calling Microsoft because he did a Google search for Microsoft tech support, my stepmother noticed what he was doing and called me. Very, very important. You guys are many times the last line of defense, because once that money's gone, the odds they'll get any of it back are almost zero. Think of it like cryptocurrencies, right? At some of these exchanges. Yeah, we're not giving you your money back. Yeah. It's not worth anything anymore. Yeah. Thanks for putting your wallet with us. So this is an interesting problem, a hard one to solve, because so many of us are so trusting here in the U.S. and abroad. And our family members who are older, who are most likely to fall for this sort of a scam, don't have a whole lot of technical prowess, but they also are far more trusting. And I would rather see a country of people who are trusting. So have them trust and yet verify by calling you. Okay, let them know that. Absolutely let them know that. This is amazing here. This is a company called Pushwish. Now, the United States government bundled mobile apps for the United States Army and for the Centers for Disease Control with Pushwish. Pushwish was claiming to be, we're a U.S. site here. We're in Kensington, Maryland. You got to trust us. Turns out, no. It is a Russian company that was sending all of the visitor data over to Russia. Interesting, eh? Yeah, so they're a little digging in. Krebs on Security had a good article that I sent out as part of my newsletter. But he's talking about how the Army told Reuters that it removed this app containing Pushwish, citing security concerns. And the Army app was used by soldiers at one of the nation's main combat training bases. CDC removed Pushwish from its code. From its code here in its app over security concerns as well. So it was operated from Novosibirsk, I guess is it how you might pronounce it in Russia. That's how I'd pronounce it, right? But it's a real problem here. We got to be careful. The British Labour Party was using it. Unilever, apparently. A European Football Association. The National Rifle Association. It goes on and on. These companies that were using it, they were conned. All right, so a big problem. Be very, very careful. Hey, I think one of the best ways I can help you is by just going ahead and telling you what's up, when it's going to happen, okay? So you got to subscribe. I don't know how else to say this. Make sure you are on my email list. I do free trainings. I do all kinds of different things to help you guys out. I have, of course, services for businesses, right? That's how I can spend this time with you every week. So I appreciate my customers out there. But I'm not going to harass you, right? This isn't an internet marketing organization. I want to help. So take a minute right now. Go to CraigPeterson.com. That's Craig, C-R-A-I-G, Peterson, P-E-T-E-R-S-O-N.com. CraigPeterson.com/subscribe. And you'll get this from me every week. All of the latest and what you need to know and do. Take care.